Recorded Books and One Click Digital present April 1865, The Month That Saved America, by Jay Winik. Narrated by the author.
Introduction. Atlanta had been overwhelmed. Columbia had been surrendered and burned. Charleston had been abandoned. The peace conference at Hampton Roads had been fruitless. And the British and the French had refused to intervene. The Army of Northern Virginia, after striking its own harsh blows against the Union in the 6 bloodiest weeks of the war, from the Wilderness to Cold Harbor, had wriggled free of the enemy's clutches and fallen back, converging in a defensive position around Petersburg and Richmond. Across the slim divide of the battered landscape lay Grant's swelling Army of the Potomac. It was the Confederacy's direst crisis since the start of the war, vaster than the fall of Vicksburg, more terrible than the failure at Gettysburg, and more traumatic than the toll of Sharpsburg. This time the South stood irrevocably alone. But as smoky light filtered off the James River below Richmond, a strange emotion prevailed throughout much of the Confederacy. It was, Southerners knew, not the first time in history that defenders had been pitifully whittled down into pieces by attacking legions, cut in half, starved, demoralized, enervated, and yet somehow had found the will to prevail. They still had 4 armies in the field, and man for man some of the finest fighting men in all of the history of warfare. Their guerrilla fighters and cavalry were second to none. Their lineage, they reminded themselves, was impeccable, stretching from the Jamestown colonists of 1607 to the Founding Fathers of 1776, and included George Washington himself. This kindled and rekindled their dwindling resolve. So did their prayers, and so did their own spirit, however waning. And so fervent were they in their desire to earn their independence that after an extensive, protracted debate, they had even held out the promise of freedom to any black man who would fight for their cause. Now, confronted by the dreaded prospect of losing all, they looked to their leadership for another George Washington, a figure who could rescue the South. In these desperate times, after all the suffering and death, after the multitude of exhaustion and despair, such a man, or such men, was the Confederacy's final chance. In the trenches of Petersburg, there was such a man, and across the Confederacy, there were such men. As a weary Abraham Lincoln, who had braced the Union when the blood was thick and victory seemed lost, so deeply feared, Robert E. Lee and the generals who looked to him for leadership, and a good many of the Confederate citizens who looked to him for guidance, were as aggressive as ever, not ready to give up, to give in, or to relinquish their Confederate identity.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?